Hi everyone, my name is Tyler and I'm here to help you get into your new 40k army. 40k as a hobby can be very expensive to get into, but my goal with this series is to help you get a full army going without having to break the bank. Before we dive into the list, let's talk about some basic rules that we're going to be using for the list building process here. Our first goal is going to be to keep it affordable and utilize box deals. For everything that we're going to be looking at today, we're going to be looking at it from an MSRP value from Games Workshop themselves. Now, I don't recommend buying everything MSRP from Games Workshop. Often, local hobby stores, eBay, Amazon, things of that nature will have much better deals for the kits that I'm about to show you. Our second goal is that we're going to be making the list in steps, starting at 500 points and working our way up to 1,000 points, 1,500 points, and 2,000 points. Our third rule is we're going to be avoiding Forge World and Finecast. Many Forge World models are often very pricey for the points that they provide you on the table, and the resin used can be hard to work with, especially for beginners. As far as Finecast goes, I just don't think that they're quite as high quality as the plastic models that you can get otherwise. Our fourth goal is to aim to make lists with decent competitive viability. We're going to be trying to make lists that can do well at casual tournaments, in your games with friends, or maybe even get you some wins at major tournaments. Our fifth and final rule is the most important one. Just because I don't mention a model in my list, it doesn't mean that it isn't good. The most important thing that you can do is collect models that you think are cool. There's an entire side of the hobby that has nothing to do with playing, and if you don't like the models you're painting and building, you're not going to get the most out of this hobby. Today, we're going to be talking about the Imperial Knights. The Imperial Knights can best be thought of as classic medieval knight houses, but replace the dudes on horses with giant robots with volcano lances. There is a very heavy focus on chivalry and life in a feudal society despite being so far in the distant future. Knight houses will often act as protectors for their citizens and will very regularly be called upon by the Imperium of Man or the Adeptus Mechanicus to be reinforcements for those armies. The Imperial Knights are made up of larger knights, such as the Questoris Knights, as well as smaller knights like Armigers. So what are some of the reasons that you should go and collect some of these big mech boys? Well, first and foremost, big robots are cool. They have smaller robots, but even their smaller robots are still big robots, which are cool. With some proper magnetization, the amount of knights that you will ever need to buy is actually really small, especially compared to most other armies. You could probably spend about $1,500 on knights, which I know sounds like a lot of money, but then you would never need to buy another Imperial Knight ever again. Unlike Chaos Knights, Imperial Knights are also both encouraged to run and thrive when played with larger knights that are able to lead Armigers in battle. But beyond that, if you have even a small Imperial Knight army, like 500 points of Imperial Knights, you can very easily splash it into pretty much every other Imperial faction that you may own. This gives it a lot of flexibility and can make those other armies much easier to start. You can also splash Imperial Agents into a Knight army to cover any weaknesses that the army might run into. This means that if you've been going out and buying Imperial Agents for your other armies, say Adeptus Custodes or Grey Knights, you can still run them over here, as the Imperium tends to work very well together. They're also just a phenomenal painting project due to the sheer size that you have with the models, but also the variety of both official and unofficial schemes. You can get very creative with what you want to do with these models, and you can also play it very standard. And one thing that a lot of people seem to get confused is that by being bigger models, they seem harder to paint. But bigger models are often easier to paint than smaller ones because they have such large canvases like the Knight shoulder pads. You can get very complex with it, and you can freehand something like a Van Gogh painting, but just slapping an airbrush on it and calling it good is a perfectly fine start. So why should you be avoiding these big robots? Well, to start, hyper elite armies are always going to be a skew. There are going to be some matchups where you will probably just automatically win because your opponent didn't bring weapons that kill big vehicles, or you might just automatically lose a matchup because they stacked weapons that are perfect into your army. This is something that you can't really avoid, and it's part of what makes Knights impossible to balance, even if they are sitting at a 50% win rate. They can also struggle very hard with secondaries given how few units you have on the board. Now, your units are going to be more durable, they're usually going to be a little bit faster, hit a little bit harder, but it's still not going to be as easy for you to get, these big vehicles into tight corners as it might be for someone who has, say, Croot Hounds or other cheap throwaway units. Your entire army being vehicles also makes them very easy to move, block, and screen, and unlike Chaos Knights, you don't have the benefit of being able to ignore terrain. Your cheapest unit is also going to be 140 points. This can lead to very awkward breakpoints where you're 30 to 40 points over what your point limit is for any particular list that you're building, and the only solution that is actually there is for you to then be 100 points under your breakpoint. There are also very limited choices when it comes to Imperial Knights. While the kits that you can buy are able to make a lot of options, especially with magnetization, you really only have like 3 kits that you can even pick from. Maybe 4 if you want to go look at Horus Heresy. It's not a very big selection. You are going to also wind up relying a lot on Imperial Agents to do a lot of the grunt work for your army. Imperial Agents are just a constantly rotating door of what's good and what's not, so you can very easily wind up spending quite a bit of extra money to chase the meta of what is the cheapest Imperial Agent, because that is going to change probably every 3 months. It is also a very airbrush reliant army to paint. You can do it all with a brush by hand if you want to, but why would you do that? Go get yourself a cheap airbrush for like $40 to $80 and save yourself the headache of trying to get all of that canvas painted in the right color. The army rule for Imperial Knights is broken up into a few different parts. First off, you've got the Code Chivalric. Basically, you're going to pick one of 2 sub-abilities, either Lelo the Tyrant or Reclaim the Realm, and you'll get an ability on units in your army. If you complete the objective of the Oath, then you gain a bunch of CP and you'll get some better rewards. But you really only get to pick one of them, and you're often going to pick Lelo the Tyrant because rerolling hit rolls and wound rolls is a lot better than just having +1 to advance and charge. The second part of it is going to be your Bondsman abilities. Some of your big knights are going to have special little abilities that they can pass on to an armiger. This just kind of means that it is actually beneficial for you to have these big knights in your army, plus the fact that you do, at the end of the day, need to have a warlord. The detachment rule for Imperial Knights is very simple in comparison, though. Every Imperial Knight model from your army is going to have a 6-up Feel No Pain, and if you've completed your Oath and gotten yourself honored, then it's going to go up to a 5-up Feel No Pain. This often means that you're just going to have a blanket 6-up Feel No Pain for the rest of the game, because the odds that your opponent just throws their warlord away can be a little hard to rely on to get that 5-up Feel No Pain. Because of how list building works with Imperial Knights, you are pretty limited in options in terms of your first starting point, but you can break it off into a number of different options. To begin with, what we're going to be doing is starting off with all of our lists, beginning with 2 Knight Armiger boxes. You can build the armigers however you want, and like I said, I recommend magnetization every single time for these things so you can change them out, but I'm going to be having them built as Warglaives. It's going to get you to 450 points. I think the Warglaives are pretty solid. Just going to give them Questoris Heavy Stubbers because their melee is good enough to already deal with vehicles, and since you are going to be potentially move blocked pretty reliably with knights, it is nice to have a heavy stubber so that you can try to pick off some of the infantry that are going to be running around and just trying to be annoying and get in your face. At 1,000 points, we do have to go and get a warlord for our army. This means that you can just go get whatever big knight you want and it'll probably be fine. But I am choosing to go and just get Canis Rex because Canis Rex is kind of just the best big knight that you can get. And also, you can make him into any of the other various Questoris Knight variants and be totally fine. When we look at how this list is going to be changed, you're going to see Canis Rex as our character and Warlord, but we're also going to be taking those Warglaive Armigers and turning them all into Helverins. This is so that we can actually get to about 995 points and be just shy of that 1,000 point value, because the Helverins are just that little bit cheaper than the Warglaives. For 1,500 points, it's going to be a pretty simple add-on. We're just going to go and pick up 2 more Knight Armigers that we're going to add into our army. We're not going to be able to run every single one of our Knights at once because they come in twos and the points are a little awkward, but we will wind up using the last one later. For 1,500 points, it's just going to be Canis Rex doing his thing. We're going to be running 1 Helverin, and we're going to be running 6 Warglaives. We have the space to buy it, and that gives us a nice little overall package with a lot of melee. Swap out however many of the Warglaives for Helverins as you want, and you're still fine. At 2,000 points, there are a couple of decisions that we can make. We can either try to make our list be 1 big knight, we could run a list with 2 big knights, or we could even run a list with 3 big knights. Because I think that all 3 of those are completely fine and viable, I'm going to be having a list for each one. This first 2,000 point list is going to just be the 1 big knight variant, so we're going to go and pick up 1 more box of Knight Armigers, and then we're going to grab a Calidus Assassin to help supplement the army. And the way that list is going to wind up looking is we're going to have 4 Helverins with Questoris Stubbers. We're going to have 6 Armiger Warglaives with Questoris Stubbers. Canis Rex is just Canis Rex. The Calidus Assassin is a Calidus Assassin who's going to be doing most of our secondary game plan for us and kind of just being that annoying up and down piece all game. But again, you can make this list have 6 Helverins and 4 Warglaives. You could make it 5 and 5. You could go in and do a kit bash or a proxy for a Moirax. It doesn't really matter as long as you just keep yourself within those 2,000 points. On the other hand, if you do want to run a 2 big knight list, then all we have to do is go pick up 1 more Questoris box with Canis Rex and the Knight Preceptor. Now make sure that you do also magnetize the second big knight, because you might have other options you want to try out down the line. But for this version, we're just going to be running it as the Knight Errant with a Questoris Heavy Stubber, the Reaper Chainsword, and a Storm Spear Rocket Pod. We want to make sure that we avoid using any kind of indirect weapon with the Knight Errant because of its ability to get +1 to hit on the closest eligible target. If you can see something out of line of sight, then that is now your closest eligible target a lot of the time, which means that you might lose out on that benefit on the thing that you actually want to shoot at. We then have 4 Helverins and 4 Warglaives. This just worked out nicely for the points. You can make more of the Warglaives into Helverins and then maybe buy a cheap enhancement for the Knight Errant if you want, but I like this as our setup. If you were enjoying the idea of that 3 big knight list though, we actually need to take it back a step. Our 500 point and 1000 point lists are going to be the exact same, but going into the 1500 point list, what we're going to do is we're going to be going and picking up 1 more Questoris Knight box, and then we are either going to pick up 1 box of Euclidean Starstriders or 1 box of Inquisitorial Agents. Both of these allow us to have a 50 point Imperial Agent unit. It just comes down to which one you prefer. At the end of the day, it's a difference of $5 and maybe some extra models on the side. With the actual list though, the Knight Errant is going to have a very similar loadout to what you saw earlier: Questoris Heavy Stubber, Reaper Chainsword, Storm Spear Rocket Pod, but we're also going to be giving him the Banner of Macarius Triumphant. This way he can sticky an objective and then move off of it, and you don't necessarily have to use your Voidsman at Arms or whatever Inquisitorial Agents you might be running to then be your backline objective holder. They can go into reserves and they can come out later and do secondaries. They can be a screening unit to prevent any kind of deep strike. They could go stand on another objective and just do whatever. Maybe the Knight Errant walks onto a second objective out in no man's land and just holds it for you even after you move him off of it. Just Depends on what you want to have him do. For the Armigers, 2 Helverins, 2 Warglaves, Questoris Heavy Stubbers. At 2,000 points, if we want to go down the 3 big knight route, then I have chosen to go and pick up the Cerastus Knight Lancer from the Horus Heresy. If you really want, you can make him another Questoris Knight, and you can make your list a little bit cheaper, but I decided to opt in for the Cerastus Knight Lancer because I think it's very cool, and I think that it does a very good job of helping to support the other units a little bit better than some of the other Questoris Knights might. With the Cerastus Knight Lancer in our army, we're going to be giving it the banner of Macarius Triumphant instead of the Knight Errant, because the Knight Errant is now going to be taking the Mysterious Guardian, so that it is able to mid-game redeploy itself and deep strike at an opponent. That's going to be it for all of the knight lists that I have for you today. It's not a super complex army to put together, but you do have some very meaningful choices that you can make along the way for some of the pickups and when you might want to get a particular unit. Now, the big thing about these 3 lists is that they have a pretty wide range in terms of how expensive they can be. The bigger knights are going to lead to a more expensive army overall, but I believe that the first list that I showed you with the Canis Rex and multiple Armigers is probably the best starting point for a new player to Knights, because it gives you all of the Armigers you're probably going to need. Because of this, I am going to lean it towards that $655 point, but it is still a little bit more pricey, so I'm going to be slotting it behind Drakari, but in front of CSM on the tier list in that $600 to $750 range. Big shout out to all of my channel supporters who help make these videos possible, such as Comrade Chin, and everyone else who's been generous enough to support me. If you would like to try and help out the channel, please consider the links in the description where you can either check out the Amazon affiliate link or go support me on Ko-fi. Thank you all for watching.